Hello, Ollie members. Thank you for taking summer foraging. I'm Leah Hayes. A few of you have taken my classes before, but a little bit about me to get started. First of all, you are joining me virtually at the Rotary Park space up here on Casper Mountain. This is a very unique class, as we have not done a virtual foraging class ever. So I appreciate you working with me and watching this YouTube video. We will have the Q&A that we got an email about in about a week, so it gives you plenty of time to review the YouTube video, and if you have troubles getting into the Zoom meeting, you can always send me emails, things like that. I'll attach my email to the YouTube presentation. So a little bit about me. I've been an Ollie instructor for a couple of years now. I've done a lot of plant identification. I'm also very into gardening, and my bachelor's degree is in food and beverage management, so I'm a little bit of everywhere, but it's all about food and where that comes from. So some of my knowledge comes from my mother being in the Forest Service since I was tiny. She was a range conservationist and helped ranchers figure out what to do with their lands and how to actually graze appropriately. And part of that was learning the plants, the animals, the soils, the microclimates, how to identify those things and know, if there's only this much of the plant left because it's been grazed down to nothingness, what actual plant life is there and what will come back and be forageable. So hers was mostly focused on cattle and ranchers, and I've taken that focus to what can we eat, what is edible and medicinal for us, and what are the things that we should be avoiding. So Rotary Park is one of my favorite places to kind of showcase a little bit of everything. It's mostly a subalpine climate, but there are some microclimates that we'll kind of point out as we go here. I'll just give you a nice little panoramic view to get started. As you can see, the elevation and all the information about Rotary Park is right here. It has a lot of the history listed as well. This is a very well-tended park, and you can see the difference between here and Casper. So the plants that you will hear are not always the plants that you will find down in Casper or on the Platte River trails, so to speak. So as we begin on our foraging walk, we will kind of point some things out here and there. Things that are super important to remember are, being prepared. So I've got my little backpack full of newspapers to hold plant clippings in, bags to gather things in, pruning shears, a tiny shovel, a Leatherman. I've got, some stuff to protect me from the elements because we are in Wyoming. Something else to think of is, what does our weather look like today? And you can kind of see these clouds and how they're reacting, and we're not entirely sure what the weather's going to be today. It seems to be a little bit cooler, so maybe we'll find a few more things than what we're used to. The number one rule of foraging is do not touch it or eat it unless you are 100% sure you know what it is. And anyone who's ever been on any of these hikes with me knows that if I'm not sure, I will tell you. You are putting yourself at risk if you cannot properly identify things. Most of the things that we will point out today will not be easily confused with something else, but if you are out on your own and you would like to try some of these things, make sure it is readily identifiable. If not, safely use gloves and trimmers to get a piece, or use our fancy smartphones and take a picture of not just the flower, not just the leaf, but do a almost panoramic sweep and figure out what that microclimate is. See if there's others that look like the same thing nearby that have a little bit more defining features. One picture of a plant is not necessarily the indicator of what that plant could be. So we will keep that in mind as we move forward, and I look forward to you joining me on this hike. As we start up this section of the Rotary Park Trail, we can already see a lot of these little yellow flowers. These are one of the earliest flowers, especially in the subalpine region, that you will find. Here you can note they've got some serrated leaves. You've also got very detailed veins and a little bit of hair. It's got a little bit of fuzziness to it. But the shape of this flower and the way that it forms in the center, similar to a forget-me-not, and the color means this is a buttercup flower. The flowers are edible. I wouldn't say that they are the most delicious thing in the history of ever. And actually within this, there are some other flowers that we might recognize. So this plant here has nice big blooms, and it goes all the way to the bottom here. So you can follow this plant all the way down. It is round. We're using our senses to help identify this. Something else that I'd like to do is take a piece here and actually rip that and rub it against my fingers. And it has a oniony smell. So this is a wild nodding onion. Something else to keep in mind, that there is a poisonous version that has very similar flowers and bulbs. So the indicator here is that oniony smell. You can, if you touch the other one, it will not hurt you, but it will lack that onion smell that you think of. So even the very tiniest detail, like something, that little white flower that you could barely see as we start this hike, is important when you go foraging. And we will continue on. Alright, now that we're a little bit farther down the trail, we can see that there are some other yellow flowers that are catching our attention here. Some of them are yet to come out, some of them are just starting to, and some of them are towards the end of their life cycle. So I will show you what those look like all together here. So we have the buttercups that we talked about just a moment ago. We also have these here. Nice bright yellow flower, kind of thick stem. When you pull this back and break, you can see the texture of that really thin leaf, but you can also see something very important here. That milky sap that happens once you break part of that plant. This often looks like a grass when it is first getting started, but the most common thing we remember seeing are the giant white puffballs that look like big dandelions. These are salsifys, and they are everywhere along this trail, and you can see several of them. Tall, spiky leaves intermingled with these buttercups. So these are edible from root to flower. You can eat them before they've come out. So these buds here are often steamed or tossed into stir fries. And this is right before that yellow flower comes out. Or you can take the petals, the yellow petals, and pull those off and treat them like dandelion petals in anything. And then you can also dig up the roots in the fall and cook them like carrots. They are often roasted. And the European mammoth salsifys were often grown and actually cultivated for those roots because of how sweet and savory they often were. So with that yellow flower, and you can see across the hillside here that there are several, and there is another bunch right there, which we can see a little bit of, and I will get a little bit closer. They have a very different leaf, a very different flower, but they are still an edible plant. And I will actually go just up the trail here to where there is a big stand of them right on the edge, making it somewhere easier and also where there is a more abundance of that plant. So as we walk, you can see that I often end up looking at my feet. Please be sure to be aware of your surroundings while you're foraging. There are people, there are wildlife, there are rocks for clumsy people. Just be careful. Be aware, but still have fun. So here, we have a fantastic example of being able to identify a plant. This plant right here has no flowers. It has these very distinct mint green soft leaves with very big veins. Kind of grows in what's called a roselle shape, where it all, or a basal shape. You can see where it kind of grows up out of one big bunch and spins around, similar to spinach. However, that could be any number of things. Without any other flowers or stems or seeds to be aware of, it's hard to identify that. And then we come over here, and the plant becomes much larger, sticking to that same shape of leaf. And it becomes huge in the exact same climate. And as we look over, those same leaves belong to these flowers. And so this flower has very fuzzy underleaves. If we open up these seeds, it peels similarly to a sunflower. And as we open up this seed pod, it has very, very, very small black seeds. Not quite like a sunflower. So as we discover the leaves that brought us to the larger leaves and the flowers with stems and seeds, then we can see that those all belong to the same plant. And so that is arrowleaf balsam root, by the way that it grows up and out of the ground, and then the way that the leaves and flowers look like sunflowers, but have a giant arrow-shaped leaf. This can be used for its flowers or its roots, and is not quite the most popular flower in Wyoming, because as we all know, that is the Indian paintbrush. So, as we continue along the path, we will find some more delicious things. All right, and as we continue on our trail, we're also keeping an eye out for things that may not be available at this time of year. So that is the biggest thing about the Wyoming climate, is that things are not always available for very long. You have a very short amount of time to find that stuff. So the one big thing that I'm going to be looking for now is fruit and berries. Not to pick, but where to find them when they're ready. So, prime example, and I'm sure most people will be able to identify this right away. You can see about how big that bush is. We're also looking at the leaf structure here. You can see that it's got a waxy leaf surface. It has the veins and an ovate shaped leaf, but it also has, and I hope I can, there we go, there, leaf serrations. These leaf serrations look like a butter knife, so that is a very important characteristic of this plant. The other thing that you can see here is the red stems on the leaves. You can also see, as it gets into the older version, that it goes from red to a darker brown, but still has a kind of reddish hue underneath of it. The other big dead giveaway are these bottle brush style flowers. So they turn and actually rotate on a stem similar to a grape cluster. They do not have an umbrella shape or anything like that. They have very small white, sometimes yellowish white flowers. This is a chokecherry. So this plant will actually, for every flower in that bottle brush, there will be a chokecherry. And so this stand, among several others in this area, including this entire section, is chokecherry. And so knowing where there's a larger conglomeration where you could come and not have to battle the birds for this really small tree will be very important. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as we walk down the trail. Okay, so as we get into a little bit different climate, I will kind of give you a view of what we're looking at here. Getting a little bit farther towards the center of Rotary Park to where most of the trailheads start in the actual stand of trees. So our climate has changed and it's gotten much more humid in the process. But within that, there are other plants that are starting to interweave themselves. So we see the chokecherry here, a bigger chokecherry here, but also we're starting to see things more like these leaves. And these leaves belong to an edible and medicinal plant. They have a very detailed, almost reptile skin texture with a lighter mint green and very noticeable veins on the back. This is a burdock, or gobo as it's often referred to. You can dig up the roots and eat them. However, in this park specifically, and I will take a little video when we get closer to the station, this is an invasive plant. And so the word weed gets thrown around a lot, but in this case it actually helps smother out other more useful plant species that have higher foraging value. And that is the point of an invasive plant listing, is that it's removing good, proper plants from the area, and it's causing them to struggle, including larger trees and things like that. So we don't see a lot of those just yet, but we will see a lot more along our trail here. Less than 40 feet ahead, and most of these larger leaves, and I will get a better, the stand of these all along the trail, and all of these larger, bigger leaves here on the ground are burdock. So you can see how that plant can take over and smother out almost everything else in this area, because there's not a lot of other plant life. The few exceptions are also one of the other invasive plant species here, including this one. So you can see its actual namesake in this picture, and it is called hound's tongue, because these flowers have that dark red tongue of a hound look. They have a long, linear, oval-shaped leaf with a long center vein that goes right down through it, a little bit of a fuzzy roselle. It also has whorled leaves, so it goes up and around the stem as far as how the leaves grow up. But this has teeny little burrs the size of each of those flowers on them that will attach and gather and spread. Very similar to this burdock in the way that it spreads and takes over. And burdock also has another name that most people know it by, which is cocklebur. It has burrs the size of sometimes quarters, usually nickels, that have several hundred seeds in them and can spread and attach and obviously take over an area. So that is something that if you are picking plants and you're not sure what they are, avoid things that you aren't certain of or that you know are invasive species like the hound's tongue or the burdock, especially while they're seeding. When they're like this, it's actually better to pick them if you would like to help keep those from taking over, as there are 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 other hound's tongue plants among these hundreds of burdock plants. So knowing when not to pick plants and when to pick plants is extremely, extremely important. This forest floor foliage is so beautiful, and like we said, you can see more of that burdock and houndstong over there, but there is something else that is rather exciting. Often known as bottlebrush, but commonly known as horsetail. This is actually an edible plant, and I will include a little slide about what you can actually eat off of it. But here is the plant itself. This is the seed head. It comes in several different varieties, but one of the main characteristics of that is it has hollow stems. Sorry, I'm having some focus issues here. Hollow stems that can be pulled apart by these individual sections. And these are the seed heads and take up the most space and have some of the best foraging value because these individual pieces are also hollow here, but they are the softest. They pull apart and can be eaten the easiest. So you can see that these like this space that has a little bit of runoff. It's a little bit taller, and actually the path itself is wet. They like to be in a wetter climate, in a wetter space, so we'll see a lot more of those closer to the actual garden creek. Something else that I like to point out, and it's one of those little mnemonic devices, is that often these horsetails grow next to other things in other families. And so these horsetails are in a rushes family. So it's because they have a very round, hollow structure to them, and that is how they grow. Where right next to them, usually you'll see another rush, something that is a little bit more hollow and round, where this one, and specifically with this seed head, which I will zoom in on hopefully. There we go. Is the rush version of this plant is actually edible, where this one, and hopefully I can get it to where you can see it, farther up this has edges, and they roll. When you roll that around in your hand, you can feel a triangle shaped stem. So being able to tell the difference between those two things is this prairie sedge. Sedges have edges, and rushes are round. Nice and easy to remember, and something easy to do to be able to feel that plant in your hand, as long as you know it is already within that family. Something I learned when I was very little from my mother. Something else that we see just down this hillside from where the parking lot is. This is not often walked, not near as much as some others, so there is a little bit better foraging value to some of this. But something else that we can see here, and it's already starting to form and it's super exciting, is this flower right here. And these buds right there. And these leaves here. They have a very noticeable leaf shape pattern, 5 lobes. Serrated, rough serrated edges, double serrated. They also have kind of a shiny background to them, a smooth stem and surface. They also have canes, so these items right here, even if they're not blooming leaves, are attached to that same plant. These are known as canes. Without them having thorns and showing pieces like this, these are thimbleberries. Thimbleberries actually will fit just on the top of your thumb. So they are a little bit wider and a little bit more shallow than a raspberry would be, but this is going to be a great space, as you can see from here all the way up this hillside are thimbleberries. So when in probably about a month from now, I'm going to be coming here to compete with the bird to get some thimbleberries. Alright, perfect example. I feel like every 2 feet there's something else I can share with everyone. But this is a great example of leaf identification and knowing the difference between one plant and another, even if they're in the exact same space. So here we have the same plant we were just looking at. 5 lobes, very distinct 5 veins that go down through it. Canes. And then we have this plant right next to it, and I'm comfortable touching this plant as I've already identified it. See how many more lobes and how inconsistent those lobes are? And then we look at the underside, and it has a much tougher and actually a strong stem structure. And you can see that it is hollow all the way through and almost has a celery-like texture. This is cow parsnip and has other edible qualities, which I will put a slide in about. But when we compare that to this one directly next to it, the stem structure is totally different, the way the leaves are growing on top of it. So knowing the difference between a thimbleberry and a cow parsnip starts with the leaves and the stems, not just the fruit. And they are intermingled in here. Here is another plant that we will find, as you can see, very close to the ground. It is a ground cover and will often end up underneath other plants. But this is a Oregon grape, and you can see it has a very distinct bottle brush flower. It also has the opposite leaves there, where they're going every other one, 2 and 2 and 1. So this is a oddly pinnate leaf, and so as we are looking at that, it goes, or an oddly pinnate leaf with an opposite structure. So they're growing 2 at a time, and then they end with a single leaf on the top, rather than ending with 2, like so. So the other thing that you'll see, and these are very soft because of how close they are to the creek, but often they're in a meadow type area. They have holly-like leaves with little spines on the end, and these are so soft that I can run my finger across them, but usually they are closer to something like this, where they are much more stabby. But these will produce little, what looks like grapes from these flowers, and they become dark black bluish fruit here in about a month or so. So this is another one of those berries that we can come out and look for. There are small seeds in them, but otherwise they have a great flavor. They're not quite as sweet as a traditional grape. I have found another plant that most of you will have seen, especially in town on the meadow areas. Right here is in its green stage. Very curly leaves, very thick, strong stem. But it is right next to some of its dead last year stems that have rust brown color, similar to this stem here, and have all these little seeds that come off of them. This is a curly dock. Those seeds and greens are edible. The greens are usually better when you can find them a little bit younger at the beginning of the season, and so being able to identify this leaf, which is getting some grasshopper treatment right now, between this one, because this is a hound's tongue that we looked at earlier, versus this one is a curly dock, curlied edges. Would be a lot of fun to be able to gather some to do some braised greens or pesto from. So we can look and notice that that is a burdock, but that is a curly dock. So sometimes using that last year's growth to help identify that plant and gather leaves for this year is very, very helpful. This space would be another great one for thimbleberries, as they are covering the entire side of the trail. Hello! We are back, and we are at the center of the little cul-de-sac thing. So I told you I would show you one of the information sites. So when you first come up, there's the big bridge and the second information plaque. And then to its left, before you go up towards the waterfall, is this sign that talks about invasive species. And it gives you a space to clean your shoes. So the ones that we were talking about that have a reward are hound's tongue, burdock. And they show you how to identify them. Just a little help from your friendly neighborhood weed and pest. This is another good example of two things next to each other that look very similar but are very, very different. So this is our thimbleberry again, where this has the heavily serrated leaves similar to a raspberry, but they are oddly pinnate, and it has a bottle brush flower on it, which raspberries and thimbleberries do not have, and it's clearly not our choke cherry. So this, when you will come around the next month or so, will actually have bright red berries. This is baneberry and is actually a poisonous berry. So leaves, again, are very, very important because the two same things can grow right next to each other. Also, keep your eyes close to the ground. This beginning of the summer is the time for flowers. These leaves are wood violets, and these flowers look like pansies and are extremely edible and delicious. Okay, so as we are walking along, came from that end of the trail where we just ate wood violets right there. We looked to our right here and found these that you need gloves for. Good gloves. I'm going to watch out for this finger. But these are stinging nettles, and the best time to pick them is now, and I am putting those in a newspaper so that I can boil them when I get home. However, if you do get stung by the nettles, you can crush the leaves like this and actually rub this green sticky goo on it. It is its own cure. So there are plenty of these right back in here and right here and hiding under the foliage. Also, do not be afraid to take a side step closer towards the creek, as this is where the roses that you can see there and those flowered bushes over there are currants. And you can see a little bumblebee. That's where you're going to want to come back in about a month to forage some of those berries, where it's kind of off the beaten path from human traffic. Alright, as we continued on, we came up the trail from the waterfall and went to the highest trail. So down there is where we came from. So the creek is off this way, and this one goes up to the Bridle Trail Loop. And this is my favorite thing to find, and it is juniper berries. So this right here, with all these nice small little green new growths, is juniper. And right now it doesn't look like much, but if you use your glove and lift that up, you can see where these berries are going to be. There's a few left from last year that are still good. Maybe just late bloomers that you could gather for seasonings, dry them and crush them up to season steak, or put them in brines, or I've seen people make tea with them. They're very, very different from dried juniper berries, and add a nice fresh Christmas taste to what you're after. So this goes all the way up there and likes to be in the undergrowth like this. And you are looking for these sharp, stabby needles in individual clusters, not lobed like a cedar tree. Now this plant right here looks like a grass. It sort of blends into it, but if you see the little bitty flowers coming out, this is wild blue flax. has the same, if not higher, omega-3 properties as the flax seeds that you buy in the store. And it likes to be in meadowy areas, so you can see how that climate has changed from just 10 feet that way with the juniper to a subalpine to more of a mountain meadow, because it's invited plants like the flax back in. This bush is very interesting. It has several different types, one of which is poisonous, but this is not anywhere close to it. These lobed, three-pronged leaves have these little clusters of not quite flowers that you can see here. And it is interwoven with this other tree, so do not get the other leaves confused. But as we zoom out, from here on the trail all the way down and up into there and up the mountain and on most of this side is that same bush. And that is sumac, which you can pick and use for a seasoning. It tastes sort of like lemon pepper.